Okay. I think the previous workshop has finished, so they're probably slowly going to come down as this starts up. But no, yeah, thank you guys for joining. It's recording now, yeah? So for this part of the day, the kind of broad overarching theme for the next hour and a half is post-capitalism. Basically an idea of generally moving around from capitalism as the dominant mode of production of society, which we'll get into a bit. But so for my presentation to kind of start it, and then later I'll have my friends Ele Kagel and Julio Linares do sessions afterwards, and a ritual, a money-burning ritual, if you would like to partake as well at the end. I just wanted to give a bit of high level, what is kind of post-capitalism broadly, and also talk a bit about some of the work that I've been doing as like a conceptual framework for thinking about how this applies to specifically the cryptocurrency context, or the, in what do we do about it, and how do we build technology with that frame of mind. So yeah, that's my talk. And I also want to convey and hopefully convince some people, if you're not already convinced here, on why crypto people should care about political theory and what they're building. So a little bit about me, in case you don't know. I have a blog and a podcast called The Blockchain Socialist. Been working in blockchain for a while, and I have a project that I co-founded called Breadchain Cooperative, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And I wrote a book that I have copies of. If you would like one, I will sign it. Called Blockchain Radicals. But so very quickly, in order to talk about post something or moving beyond something, we have to define what that something is, which is a very difficult task to do in this context, because capitalism is a very loaded term and can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. I'm curious to know, when I say the word capitalism, do you have either negative or positive? Do you have a strong reaction to that word? Is it something that you feel strongly about, whether negative or positively? A show of hands. A little bit, some people know. It's okay. So very quickly, I'm going to skip over thousands of hours of education and studying that probably someone needs to do to be able to write about this in full confidence. But capitalism, if we look it up on through our friends Google, you get this definition from, I believe it's Oxford. It's an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. So it is specifically a way of organizing society in which profit is a dominant kind of a driving force for how we produce things. So this includes specifically here the private ownership of the means of production. This is done through private property, through the legal regimes of private property that the state creates. We have the domination of capital as a mechanism for allocating resources. So this is basically the profit motive, which we'll go through a little bit. This also leads to unresolvable tensions between labor and capital, or class conflict. So labor and capital have different needs and desires. Full employment is largely an undesirable thing to happen by capital in many ways. Value is largely expressed through money in a very mono way. And commodity production and finance dominate, and we have homo economicus, or this belief that humans are constantly economical, rational agents in the economy, making decisions based on opportunity costs and whatever types of points they're keeping in their head, and as well as as acceleration, or the idea of acceleration as a kind of ideology within all of this. This is very, very high level stuff that each of these points can be hours long discussion and presentations. But I think one of the kind of in order for me to appeal to maybe some of the developers that are here, or the math people who are here, there is a famous kind of algorithm, we can say, that Karl Marx proposed of how to explain what capital is. And it is essentially this very simple one called MCM prime. So someone has money, they buy a commodity, and then they earn money by selling that commodity. They earn more money than the money that they put in. So they're making a profit, right? And this is you can think of this as like an entity in it of itself, as like this kind of amoeba that is constantly on the search for more money to concentrate around. So it always wants to like concentrate into like a larger and larger amount. It has almost like it's almost like a very, very dumb artificial intelligence that wants to get bigger and bigger. And so you can think of this as basically like a feedback loop, where on one side you have capital that always wants to get that M prime, they always want to get that profit, more money than they had before. And then on the other side, you have workers or labor, in which people are having to engage in CMC, or they are basically having to sell the commodities that they have, which is mainly their labor. They earn money for that in order to buy other commodities that they need to survive and live under this system. So it creates this compulsion of needing to always be able to make money in order to buy commodities on the market. At the same time, you have to sell yourself on the market in order to be able to get your basic needs met. And so this causes like many different types of problems. To me, I like to think of capitalism as this centralizing force where capital begets capital. So there is always this tension, especially when we talk about in the crypto context, where we like to talk about decentralization. I think one of the things, points of centralization that we miss is this area of capital and how capital can earn more of itself. And it's easier to earn more of itself when you already have more of it. So it's this sort of like self-feeding loop. And so in this situation, this means that many things in society are subservient to the needs of capital in the long run. So this means that like the environment is subservient to capital. So like oil companies are on a suicide mission to extract as much oil as possible and keep making money no matter the cost to the environment. It means that our mental health is subjected to this, and we can see this through like things like hustle culture or something like that. Our labor rights are affected by this, which means that like, you know, you get less and less benefits over time because companies need to make more and more profit. Our civil rights are also subjected to this. So oftentimes, you know, civil rights are only granted up until the point where it is profitable for companies to give that right away. And so for another way for me to appeal to the crypto people is that you can think of capital as essentially a governance token that is acquired via markets in a kind of like authoritarian way, where you are able to use that capital to gain more and more voting power into how we are able to allocate resources throughout the economy in like a very, very crude sense. And so this is, I think, very interesting because you have like this imaginary of Moloch in the crypto space, Moloch being this like occult kind of god monster that eats children, being used as a metaphor for coordination failure, but actually the original kind of writings about Moloch, this poem called Howl, that was originally referenced by Scott Adams, forget the guy's name, the psychologist that a lot of people like to reference to when it comes to this Moloch narrative in the crypto world. It was a reference to capital being Moloch, that we are having these like failures in coordination and being able to achieve societal goals because Moloch, or capital, is basically subsuming everyone into very particular types of behaviors in which are not conducive to like properly functioning society. And so surely, right, hopefully, if we're hopeful, this can't last forever, right? So we have on one side, you know, we are coming from, if we're being optimistic, late stage capitalism in which we are undergoing this kind of like societal death drive to increasingly become more and more part of the market, to become less and less human, because the more human we are, the less we are able to like make decisions that are away from the influence of capital. I think at the moment we're at this kind of like inflection point, or at least I would like to think that we're at this inflection point where a lot of people, I think, are becoming very, very disillusioned by the current system and will like something different. And in part, I think that is what attracts a lot of people to the crypto world, because they do see that there are a lot of problems with the way that current existing institutions work, and they would like something different. So hopefully something better. And I would argue that we could call this post-capitalism or after capitalism. But so what exactly then is post-capitalism? What does that mean? And in very in a very broad sense, I would at least think about it, at least if we're thinking about post-capitalism being something better, I would say it means that it's a significantly reduced reliance on capital, this MCM prime type of relationship, as the dominant mechanism for resource allocation. And one of the ways that I think we can reduce this connection with capital is through collective ownership. So through collective ownership, we can instead allow people to add other types of concerns and needs into the equation of like, what do we do with our stuff? I think it also means potentially like a more multidimensional measurement of value. So rather than solely thinking about everything through the lens of like what financial value we can make out of this and we can create out of this, we're instead thinking about a kind of like plurality of different types of values that all are considered rather than a kind of very unidimensional way of how we coordinate with each other via markets. I think this would also mean a kind of decentralized coordination for the common good of humanity. So trying to find, I think, different types of feedback loops than this MCM prime one, finding different things that can feed itself in a similar manner. Maybe capital is able to do so, but in a way that is producing a common good in some way. And then at the same time, I think this is with the caveat that we are doing this, this is still to be created within the shell of the old, so within the shell of what already exists. So this basically means that you can expect a lot of contradictions in what this means, because we cannot kind of simply rid ourselves of previous behaviors, previous types of social institutions that we have been brought up in to like simply disappear. So like we see, like even with the creation of capitalism or the domination of capitalism out of feudalism, that we have a lot of these like remnants of different feudal relationships that still have not necessarily gone away or have evolved in a way that have fit itself into how capitalism works, right? We still call them landlords. This is kind of like a remnant a bit of our feudal past. And so we can expect these types of contradictions. But I think there are like, this has already been happening for a very long time, actually. It's not that everything that we do ever is always subjected to the whims of capital and what it desires. And I am not, of course, always making decisions with my friends or my family, like I'm not counting up how much they owe me all the time, or I am not, like putting a price. My parents didn't charge me for raising me. Like a lot of our different types of relationships that are like very common in society are not subjected to capital, of course, because it would be very weird to do so. But I think if we go beyond that as well, there are different ways in which we as humans interact with one another in different types of social organizations in which we don't as well put profit as like the main mode of the way that we interact with one another. So I mean, there are examples out there like commons-based peer production, which is what Ayla will talk about afterwards. We can think of the solidarity economy as a place where people are doing economic activity with one another without this intention of making profits. So I think looking through the lens of cooperatives, trade unions, free and open source software, solidarity lending, all these types of things are ways that plenty of people interact and do economic activity with each other without it being capitalism, without it being like maybe influenced in some way by capitalism, because we're all subjected to the system that is much larger than ourselves, but is not like the primary driving force of it. And so why is this important in this space? A lot of people will talk about, in the talk earlier that Stephen, he spoke quite a lot about it. A lot of people like to believe that tech is apolitical, that it is something that is like away or different. There is this like line that we can say, I don't do politics, I do tech. So a lot of people I hear a lot of times say like, keep the politics out of this, I just want to do crypto. But I just want to say that I'm very sorry, unfortunately, we don't have a choice about this. And so like one of the, this is a really interesting paper that was written in like 1980 by Langdon Winner. He had this title, Do Artifacts Have Politics? In which he basically says, unfortunately, technology has politics whether we want it or not. So artifacts or technical objects have political properties and embody forms of authority and subordination. So we would say that like different types of technology, their existence, given the context in which it exists, inherently creates people who are subordinated by it or subordinated by certain classes within society. So workers are often not given the right to participate in the decision-making process of which technologies are the ones that we want to introduce into society or not. And this therefore also influences the way that people connect with one another, because the desires or like the interests of workers were never considered whenever we were like creating this particular technology and therefore introducing it into the market or into society. And so he gives a couple of examples. You know, some artifacts work well with specific systems of power and authority. So certain technologies are inherently autocratic and require particular social structures for their implementation, with, you know, the caveat that like any technology that is introduced always has some sort of social structure in which it is introduced into and is a part of, and that cannot be separated. And so he gives the example of the atom bomb as a technology that is inherently authoritarian. Like, you cannot have a kind of like decentralized, democratic type of decision-making, whatever, horizontal anarchist society when there are nuclear weapons involved in the mix, because one person can press the button and lead to a lot of death. And then he juxtaposes this a bit with solar power as being something that is much more decentralized and doesn't represent a security risk, and therefore it is inherently democratic and populist within the context of the society that we live in. And so there is another book that I agree with some stuff, but I disagree with a lot of other things, by David Columbia, called The Politics of Bitcoin: Software as Right-Wing Extremism, where he talks about that a lot of the political assumptions within Bitcoin are inherently kind of conservative and right-wing. And we can look at this, like there are many like different parts where you can kind of see this. For example, this 21 million cap on Bitcoin, as probably most of us know, this is like the maximum amount of Bitcoin that will ever be meant to exist. The purpose of that, or the intention was to mimic gold as a type of commodity. So gold being a limited amount in the earth, we can only have so much. And part of in the narrative of why the gold standard was a better monetary system was that because gold is scarce, therefore it makes it a good money, because we can't have money that is non-scarce. You also see this kind of like assumptions within the Bitcoin code and within, really more, you see this represented in the Bitcoin community, but like people believing in this type of immutable digital private property, that whatever is your private property listed out on the Bitcoin blockchain is forever yours, and that should never change, no matter how much other people want it to, because that would be authoritarian or subject you to some type of authoritarianism. So this is, I think, closely linked to this phrase and this like belief in code is law, or that that code in particular blockchains, but there's plenty of research around this idea in other types of tech spaces, that whatever is written into the code, whatever you do with it is therefore legitimate, whether or not, no matter the intentions of either the creators or the people that use that code or take part in its use or governance. And then as well, you can also think about like Bitcoiners not really giving much of a shit about environmental impacts. Of course, with a lot of caveats, some people do, but a lot of them don't. And you can see this within Bitcoin, having not considered this kind of direct relationship between the more hash power you use or the more energy you expend on mining Bitcoin, the more Bitcoin you get. So there's this direct link between exertion of energy and the amount of money that you make from it. So there's a lot of like very kind of like conservative, ideological, political beliefs that are very embedded in the code itself. And we can see this even with the intentions of who is one of the like potential creators, or who potentially Satoshi Nakamoto, Hal Finney. So there's this really interesting history. There's this book called Digital Cash. I'd recommend if you guys want to read it, if you want to learn about the prehistory of crypto. A lot of the driving force around the creation of Bitcoin came from the work of these people called the extropians, or people who believed in this kind of like future of anarcho-capitalism, where finally the state will wither away, we will have no state money, fiat money will end, we'll have this perfect monetary system, and we'll do, markets and everything else will take us to the stars, and we'll live intergalactically, and we'll live forever, because without the state, then we can do all this innovative medical research that'll make us live forever. So Hal Finney was one of these guys who was really into this as well, and he also froze himself when he died cryogenically, because a lot of these people believe that this future will come, but it won't come within their lifetime, so they need to freeze themselves and then be unfrozen whenever their utopia has come. But if this utopia is a capitalist utopia, which means that they need to pay off for the service in which they paid for to be frozen, that means that they will have to take on a debt. So they need a monetary system that will last from now until this hypothetical future when their utopia is finally existing, and then they will have to pay off that debt. And so using the internet as a place where you can create a monetary system that will survive the apocalypse and then the creation of utopia was like paramount to this political project of not that many people and mostly business owners. And this is like, I don't know if you guys have watched Cowboy Bebop. It's like a really fun, it's really cool anime. There's this girl, one of the main characters, Faye Valentine. She got into an accident, and then she was cryogenically frozen after the accident, and then unfrozen, and then she was like permanently in debt because of this service that she was provided of being cryogenically frozen. So she has to turn to a life of crime and bounty hunting in order to survive. So this is the kind of like, political imaginary that we're thinking about from the people who are like the progenitors of Bitcoin. And so like this is just to hammer down the points that like even in the crypto space, like the very beginning was always a political project, and it was always something in which politics were meant to be projected into the future. Okay, so now some of you may be thinking like, all right, can you please stop complaining, and like, what are you gonna do about it? Like, what start building, huh? Well, let me show you what I'm building in order to, talk to the devs. So I run a project that I mentioned previously called Breadchain Cooperative. Essentially a network of different projects that would consider themselves post-capitalist, or thinking about building infrastructure for something different or something new. Basically, we share many different things, including labor power, resources, decision-making, and whatever else. And the idea is that we want to use crypto stuff in order to like help build this out and create the types of institutions that we need for building this. And so, kind of like why we're building it is that the idea is, of course, blockchains will probably become more consequential over time. And so we want to build the infrastructure in this preparation for whenever this happens. We're first and foremost a kind of federation or network to be a point of reference for other types of projects that are thinking similarly. We also need to deal with the contradictions of being both within a system that we don't agree with and against it. And so this is essentially, in my view, like people versus money, or building things for people versus building things for the accumulation of capital. Those are two very different things. And so we are a kind of like mimetic attractor for exploring the crypto world in this kind of political framework. So it's not about building one application or one button that we can press and then solve all our problems, but like a much more nuanced view on this. And so kind of the core objectives of what we're trying to do is to scale solidarity as an alternative to capital and how we relate to one another, create financial sustainability for these types of projects in order to help them endure the existing one, and build a coalition for people to advise, to skill share, and to cross-promote, etc. So essentially, it's this idea that apes together strong. And so just kind of broadly, our principles include economic democracy. So this is the idea of bringing democracy much more into the economy rather than being subjected to market forces, transparent governance, mutual aid, and dual power. So building kind of alternative structures while we still have the existence of the current one as well. And so at the moment, there are 3 other projects within this federation. So Stephen, who spoke earlier this morning, is part of Symbiota Co-op, which is also where Dandelion, the events platform that he runs, falls under. Another project called LaborDAO, and the other one, the Crypto Commons Association. So we all kind of are grouped together to try to collectively build this type of infrastructure that we want to see using the tools that we see available to us in the crypto world. And so the conceptual framework that I'm using in order to build these types of things is what we've kind of termed solidarity primitives. So we're taking this already existing kind of term in the crypto world of financial primitives, or basically people like to say like Lego blocks of different packages of code in which you can connect together and build like larger, more complex Lego structures, which are really, for the most part, oftentimes different types of financial products used for speculation and making bets in different ways. We're instead interested in using blockchains and smart contracts and software as a way to build these primitives or pieces of software, combine them in a way to forge solidaristic relationships between individuals and collectives. So rather than building things for money, for profits, for financial speculation, we want to build things for solidarity. And think about the fact that since technology is not apolitical, since there is always a politics to any type of technology that you put in there, the idea, what we're trying to build is like, then how do we instill the type of politics that we want inside our technology? So this is kind of like the conceptual frame and term that we've used. If you're interested, this previous one, this is something that we wrote on our Mirror blog, you can check out. And then this is a larger piece of writing that was done by Other Internet, in which they explored this framework of solidarity primitives in building social security infrastructure and systems for people working in Web3. So if you are someone who works in a DAO or maybe works in one of these types of decentralized organizations, then you may want to take a look at this, where they expanded on this concept of solidarity primitives. And so the main thing that we're building that I want to talk about as well, just to give you like a very practical thing of what we're doing, is our token, which is called Bread. This is our first kind of solidarity primitive that we've created. So Bread is basically a stable currency. It's something that is equal to $1, and that's because it is backed 100% by XDAI, XDAI being the native cryptocurrency on Gnosis chain, and XDAI being a reference to DAI, which is a US dollar stablecoin through MakerDAO. And essentially the way it works is you go to our application and you give XDAI to the application, and then you receive back 1-to-1 in Bread. So if you send 1 XDAI, you get 1 Bread, etc. So this application is where Bread is created, and in the back end, the XDAI that you've given in the smart contract is converted into SDAI, which is the DAI savings rate, which is earning a yield, essentially. And so at the moment, the yield is fairly high, so we're getting around 10% yield from all the XDAI that people give. And then that is what's being funded, used to be funding the cooperative or the network. Just to say that you may be asking, where is this yield coming from? It's coming from MakerDAO, from a lot of different ways, but one of the ways that they're doing it, that they're funding this DAI savings rate, is through the liquidation of basically vaults that people create in order to create DAI. So if you get your vault liquidated, then you are helping fund us a little bit. And so at the same time, with your Bread, you can vote on how the projects, or how the yield gets distributed amongst the projects that are within the network. So 50% of it is given to everyone equally, and then the other 50% is based on the vote of people who have baked Bread in our application, and therefore we're getting this kind of like democratic kind of feedback loop of people and like how they would, if they wanted to, fund these projects. And so in like very simple terms for our sustainability, what this basically means is that the more Bread that is created, the more money or interest is being generated for the cooperative and the network. That means, like, for us, like, this is a very different dynamic than raising through venture capital or asking, for different types of investment vehicles. In this way, we are instead needing to incentivize people to not get rid of their bread or not to burn it, and instead disincentivize that and offer opportunities and ways for people to use bread or to rather than burn it, but to swap it on a decentralized exchange or something like that. And so fairly recently, just to say, like, we've been working closely with Gnosis DAO, where they minted 200K bread, so they're kind of like helping bootstrap us a little bit, where they're not giving us an investment or anything else, but they've minted bread, and therefore we're generating yield from the amount that they've given. And so in, like, very, very simple terms, I think we can think of what's being created here, this infrastructure, as a combination between a local currency and a credit union. So the bread token is like a local currency that you can spend within the bread economy. It's not local in the sense that it's not a physical place, but it is a kind of a mind space, or like a place where people have similar values. And a credit union in the sense that where you get to actually decide on how your bank invests their money. So rather than, giving your money to a big bank that is like investing in oil exploration or whatever other things that you wish they didn't do, here we're at least very honest, this is where all the money goes, and you get to decide on, like, the distribution of how that money gets shared amongst the projects. And so, yeah, you can use bread in different places. I use this slide for a different event. That's why it's at the top. You can buy stuff. I will sell my book in bread if you want. But you can do, for example, create events and sell tickets on the Dandelion events platform. You can buy tickets that the Crypto Commons Association does for their own events. We are integrated into Giveth, so you can give there, where you can, like, double up your public goods funding if you're into that, and other things. Kind of our funnel for growth here is to integrate into a couple of other services like Gnosis Pay, which is the debit card that Gnosis has created, in which you have, basically, you can send or have euros held in a safe, in a multi-sig wallet, and that will be where the euros are pulled out of every time you tap your card to make a payment. We can basically, we are building something where you can basically effectively spend your bread, so spend your local currency through the Gnosis Pay debit card, and doing things like that. So we can combine that with Monerium, which gives you an IBAN, so you can send euros from your normal bank account into your crypto wallet, and do all these things that make it just, like, easier or more useful type of thing that you can do. Basically sharing solidarity with a bunch of people and groups without needing to necessarily sacrifice a whole bunch in order to do that through this integration. And this is, like, really, really useful because local currencies are quite difficult to design, because in order to prevent a kind of accumulation of local currency in a singular place, you have to find out the pathway in which, like, different small businesses will pay each other for different things in order to make sure that the money keeps flowing. So you see oftentimes in these local currency things, it will kind of pool up in, like, one place, and this can become difficult because they may not have a place then to spend all the local currency that they said that they would accept. So it's a very difficult problem to solve, and we're, lucky through the Gnosis Pay debit card, we're able to kind of avert that quite large problem. And so this is our application, app.breadchain.xyz. You can go to, you can try it out, you can bake some bread, and help fund post-capitalist Web3. It looks just like that, so it looks kind of like Uniswap, but cooler, I would say. And right now, I'm hoping that we're going to finish up the voting dashboard, that we're wanting to do our first vote at the end of the month. So this is kind of what it will look like. We will have your different options for your different projects. The idea is, of course, that the network will grow, so there will be a lot more options as time goes by. But you're able to kind of just put some voting points across different options, and then apply this proportion to everyone's voting power, and then that will be like automatically distributed at the end of the month for which projects based on everybody's feedback. And then kind of one of the other things that I'm also interested in building and sharing with you guys that we're kind of farther down on the roadmap is this economic dashboard. So in capitalism, you know, the kind of capitalist subjects or homo economicus, the person who constantly makes decisions based on where and when they can profit the most, and playing into information asymmetry in order to like make bets in which other people have less information about is like kind of core to, I think, the functioning of capitalism. If everybody knew exactly the same thing and the same amount of information, then no one would be able to make a profit because everybody would know the exact same thing and what would happen, right? So this information asymmetry, I think, plays a big part, and it also encourages people to act as this homo economicus, to act as this individual in which I am competing on the market against everyone else. And even if I wanted to help out a collective, I wouldn't be able to know how to even begin to do that because I don't have the information available to me to like synthesize and then, you know, come up with some sort of action or some sort of, action in a collective sense for people to like assist this collective. And so for me, I think if we think about who is the person that lives in our post-capitalist world, is not someone that gets cryogenically frozen and then has to go into debt in order to pay it off, but instead is someone that engages in a kind of collective intelligence because they have access to the information that is out there and is aware of their place in the system and what are the particular points of action that they can take in order to help that collective. So the dashboard would be a place where you can see a lot of bits of information, and then we would also, based on your profile, be able to recommend to you different things that you can do in order to help the collective of Breadchain. This is our roadmap that I haven't really published yet, but I will make some sort of ThinkBoy Twitter post at some point going into our roadmap. We have a lot of stuff that we want to work on. And yeah, thank you. I hope I went fast enough because I know we have other stuff to go into. And this is my book.
Yeah, so you mentioned that brilliant idea of like multi-currency world, but currently it only works on bread. So do you have a roadmap or like some plan to migrate that to more multi-dimensional way of tracking the contributions?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're interested in, I put this point, but I kind of just like glossed over it where I put it. The third point that I put in there was, in the future, we want to add more variables into like how governance happens as far as yield distribution. So when I say currency, I'm not specifically talking about like a monetary currency per se. Like this term currency can be abstracted to mean a whole lot more things, like reputation systems as a form of currency. We can think of as like another like big area of research that even a lot of people in crypto are doing. But so I think like having, in this sense, like, bread is basically a form of, it's like a representation of money, but in the background, you are helping fund, these post-capitalist projects, but and this also determines like how much voting power you have. And so basically the more money you have, the more money you put into the system, the more voting power you have, which is like, helps us deal with the difficult point of like needing money under a capitalist system, but like, even though we like want something else, but we can in the future begin to create like different types of reputation systems or just like, to give benefits to people for engaging in the system or helping the system in other ways beyond just like giving their capital. So the idea would be we can give like an NFT for people who give through their labor, for example, if they help out with a project, and that would give them a kind of a boost in their voting power in the system. So you can get 20% more voting power because you helped out for something, for example. So we can begin to, I think, play with different types of tokens and use them as different kinds of currencies to mean different things that I think is more rich and more interesting rather than, I think what we see in like DAO space often, or like in the crypto space generally, of like you make a token and it's basically like a security, you know, and or it is like some sort of representation or replacement of money. And I think like there is this whole other design space that some people are working on, but we could use a lot more eyes and hands on it.
Yeah, my question would be, how many bakeries are already involved and how's the response from non-crypto people? And is then the scaling rather taking place digital, so it's rather symbolic and you just experiment with the bread?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's definitely symbolic. I think part of the idea is, of course, like, at least for me, like, you know, I believe that everyone deserves to eat. Like, food is like a human right for everyone, so everybody deserves some bread. And that way it's symbolic, of course. I think we did have, at our launch events, a couple of us went to Edible Alchemy and we baked some bread that we brought to our launch events. And like,
but it's a good way to,
afterwards.
I mean, get people more connected to it.
But yeah, but if you know some bakeries who would like to partner with us, then let me know.
Yeah, I'm part of a food collective, actually, so we have some connections.
Great, I'd love to talk about it, yeah. There's a guy up here, I think.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. Could you explain the part again where you say that like profit from capital is bad, but then yield from capital is good?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, there's of course a lot of contradictions that we have to like traverse in this type of world where if you want to build something different, but you're stuck in the one that currently exists, right? At the moment, we're living in a world where capital is dominant and capital is a necessity in order to survive in many ways, or at least the money part of capital is necessary to survive. So for me, what's different is that usually, right, whenever like capitalists fail at being like doing capitalism and they like speculate and they lose on a bet or whatever else, that money gets shoved back into other hands of people who are again engaging in like the mechanisms of capitalism. Like they're always reinforcing. So in a system where like it feels like for example, the financial crash, 2008, we had this huge implosion of the financial system. Seems like it's really, really broken. However, we had like the state basically backstop the entirety of the financial system in order to like keep it going. So they basically like fed more money into the system in order to keep the system itself that was like causing the failure in order to keep going for a bit longer. So like this is like what I mean by it's kind of like an amoebic structure that is able to like feed back into itself and become bigger. Like now we have banks that are like 10x bigger than before the crash. I think the difference here for us is that the purpose of the money that we're receiving is for the purpose of creating alternative structures. Like the fact that we are trying to make institutions that are different with a different logic embedded in it is what is the difference to me. Like, of course, there are plenty of like the solidarity economy relies on people having money oftentimes in order to like do trades and whatever else. It's like we also need money because we all have rent to pay, we all have food to buy, we all have like things to take care of that we can't like remove ourselves from that. So the difference, I would say, is mostly the fact that we are intentionally trying to create something that is different rather than more of the same. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if you're convinced.
Sounds like what you're saying. Sounds like what you're saying is that because the goal is different, the thing in itself is different. So like yield being different from profit in this case. But I mean, maybe I make profit in order to later donate it to charities. Doesn't matter, right? So it sounds like exactly the same kind of reasoning as of a capitalist who's making profit in order to donate later.
Yeah, there's this whole like, I mean, I'm like very, very anti-philanthropy. I was talking about this yesterday with my friend. Like, philanthropy, I think, is this entire like structure that is meant to be almost like this like Catholic way of like paying for your sins, where you're like, I'm sorry that I've exploited, you know, the earth and everything around it, where I'm just like paying charities in order to feel better about myself. I think that is very different than a solidarity economy, where the point is like creating relationships that are much more horizontal, not paternalistic, in which we are giving to each other the things that we are able to give to each other that isn't a kind of like wage labor relation, or isn't this like paternalistic, like charitable type of donation type of way.
I mean, make it a
But yeah.
donation to a commune. Doesn't matter, right? I mean,
Yeah, well, we'll talk more later.
Oh, hi, great talk. Sometimes I've come to view Ethereum as being a kind of negative development for the kind of framing that you've put forward, in particular because it provides us with the tools of creating kind of hyper-capitalist machinery, and what it doesn't allow you to do is represent people on the blockchain robustly. I just wonder what you thought about kind of technology towards civil resistance, and whether that's a kind of essentially a missing piece to the kind of post-capitalist mindset.
Yeah, so I think this is like getting to like, if we want more democratic structures, we need like a form of identity to prove like you are a person. Otherwise, you can like create as many accounts as you want and like ruin the kind of whole voting process type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely like a very interesting like place of like research and exploration. It's like a very difficult problem to solve that I feel like a lot of other people are working on, that I'm like interested in how they figure it out and then like seeing what we can do with it. I'm very much like it'll be open source, so we can steal it, probably for the most part, we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. But I don't think it's like a stopping point to where we can't do anything until that's solved, if that makes sense. But I do agree there's like part of the reason, the fact that we don't have that, and because it is so cheap, like it adds to this hyper-capitalistic nature of crypto. I would agree with that critique, yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. Just a quick question about like one of the very first slides that you mentioned, the post-capitalism work, basically. And there one of the key points that you mentioned was collective ownership. So I'm just curious, in this kind of world, how do you imagine there would be like blockchain and crypto, right? That is kind of more decentralized, where everyone like owns such like a part of it, right? And also, also implementing it with the idea of collective ownership, where like ideally everyone has equal access to all the resources, right? Resources are equally distributed regardless of the contribution, like all the privileges, all the rights. And in your practical system, you mentioned that like people will get more like kind of privileges to vote, for example, or vote for the projects, contribute more to the like selection of the projects. So I'm just a little bit confused on how these two factors will kind of like mix with each other. So can you reason a bit more on it?
The factors are collective ownership.
Yep. Yeah.
And what was the other one?
Like how is practical system gonna like implement it and kind of mix it with the idea of using crypto, decentralized money as well?
Yeah. So I mean, at the moment, like, there is, right, like the way that the system works is that you have essentially not ownership in the sense of like the way that you would own like a security or like ownership in a company, but you do have voice in like how we distribute yield within the network. Okay. I would say that is more like collective kind of decision making. Ownership itself is maybe like a bit more complicated because it's more multifaceted. Like the way that our governance work is, you have, within the projects themselves decide like which new project gets added, and we don't like allow for anybody to simply like to say like, oh, I want to give like all the money to me, so I'll like make a bunch of bread and then like vote for me and then like take all the money and run. So like it's sort of like this, we've divided up different kinds of forms of ownership, or like what are the responsibilities of different stakeholders within the system, at least here, that are like forms of collectivity, and that are, to me, this is like approaching the kind of like, what are the types of collectivity that we can do now, and then what are the types of collectivity that we can do into the future, like with this funding and with like using this technology. So one of the things, of course, that like in the future, what we want to like explore more of is like, how do we build more of these infrastructures of collective ownership, and what does that look like, and how do we represent that, perhaps if it makes sense, on a blockchain or using smart contracts or whatever else. I don't have like any specific answers of like how we want to do that, because we also are not trying to emulate like a security within a company. We're not like a company in which we will give, you know, the stock to everyone as like that specific form of collective ownership, but we're trying to explore something else, something different.
So by this, you mean it would not be money, Fred tokens, but rather it would be like decision making, right? So kind of organizational structure.
Could be, yeah.
Okay.
That's like one of the things that it could be, and yeah, it's more like decision making sounds small. I think like it sounds like a menial thing, but it's like a
organizational culture, something like that.
Yeah, there's like a lot of things that can be decided on, you know, that you can create different kinds of verticals for this. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I think we got him over here. Or I don't know how much longer we have.
I'll be quick. So it seems you have a cooperative and you have a way of getting some interest on your treasury. What makes you think that this is a stable way to get interest on a treasury? And why do you think necessary, or if you think that necessarily getting interest on treasury in blockchain is the best way? Perhaps some people with business experience would have different, better ideas.
Yeah, I think at least to the second question, like it's like traversing the legal system of finding out what are the appropriate legal types of entities for collective ownership in an international context is very like difficult. It requires a lot of, a lot of research into like how exactly you do that and how you want to, and what are the like implications tax-wise and whatever else. And then it also probably costs a lot of money in like lawyer fees and to figure out like what are the types of legal entities that are best for it. Because that's kind of like, to me, I think this, this aspect is quite difficult. It's sort of like, you know, why don't you just make a joint bank account? It's like kind of difficult to make a joint bank account when everybody's in different countries. I think that's like and like in one that is like also, if we want to allow for input from a lot of people that is like directly like executable or is directly like important, then like I think crypto is like an interesting tool to explore that. And then your first question, I forgot. Why is it stable? Yeah, it might. I mean, the truth is that it might not be stable over time. We don't know for sure because this is the crypto world and whatever else. I think that my bet is that MakerDAO, the current rendition that we have now is sort of like the version 0, and we have the kind of like space to explore different types of revenue streams based on how the market changes. But I think for now, it's fine because MakerDAO is with, like, there is this competition between DeFi protocols, between MakerDAO and Aave and all these other lending and whatever else, like places that people are trying to find yield, and Maker, I think, is like basically engaging in this competition where SDAI, or the DAI savings rate, is an important aspect of like how stable coins are going to be distributed amongst the different protocols. So I think they're in a competition where they need to keep it a bit higher as long as it's higher in other parts of the ecosystem. But there is like, of course, the risk over time that like if everything goes down, if all rates fall, then like our rates will obviously fall as well. And so I think part of our strategy is, you know, in the roadmap in the little tiny boxes, some of them were like how we're going to diversify the places where we earn revenue, things like that.
Just a practical one.
Yeah, I think Ayla is next.
Because we like at so you were at 16:30 and it's at 5, which is 40 minutes ago, used to be common spaced peer production. And 5:30, which was
All right, I think Ayla's next then. You can go to her.
and then it's at 6:15, and then we'll go to advantage.
All right, thank you. Ayla.